record on the computer. Okay, so I think we are recording now. So welcome. My name is Karol Maybury. I teach at UMF in the psychology department, and our guest today is Brandon Martin, a graduate of our program with his BA in May of 2021.
Yes. Yep.
And Brandon recently was accepted to the Kent State Ph.D. program. And so what we're planning to do today is for us to ask 5 questions that I think many students who might be in Brandon's position, time traveling back a couple of years might have. The 5 questions are to Brandon: how did you determine that you wanted to pursue a PhD? Secondly, how did you start the process? Third, what would you say to a student who wants to pursue a PhD but isn't certain about the topic area that they want to pursue? Fourth, what aspects of the application process most surprised you? And fifth, do you have any pieces of advice, things you wish you'd known earlier for applicants? So is that pretty straightforward?
Hopefully.
All right, good. So the first question is, how did you decide or determine that you wanted to pursue a PhD?
I think I probably first had an inclination that that's what I wanted to do, probably around like my sophomore year. I definitely went at least a year or two in college not knowing what I wanted to do, but I started becoming really interested in like teaching. And then once I took research methods, I thought it was really interesting to like maybe pursue a career that could do both things. And so talking a little bit more with you as my advisor, and then also, other people around the department, kind of realizing like a tenure track position for like a professor job could be a really good area, or anything else in research, just continuing that, because I thought that was really interesting from the start and something that I could see myself pursuing. And looking more into that, it became clear that like not only would a PhD make you more competitive for those positions, but are sometimes required, especially for more of the tenure track, or at least like highly recommended. I don't know exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that was probably when I first realized that's what I wanted to go for, and just continue learning and continue bettering myself for a career path that I found myself interested in.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, sometimes it's a great question. Sometimes that you bring up, or a point. Sometimes people do, with their masters, are able to get a teaching position at like a community college. Even those positions more and more are requiring the PhD, but that's not atypical for someone to have their masters. And then going into that. And I know through our other conversations that I think oftentimes people go into psychology, as a major, thinking that they want to help people. And, they start to take some of the counseling classes and realizing kind of what's involved in that. For many people, that energizes them for a counseling. And for many people, they are like, oh, I'm not so sure this is for me, or they take research methods, oftentimes not until really late. And then they're like, oh, I'm really digging research. And so I'm so glad you took it in your sophomore year. Not many students do that, but that's maybe a benefit of taking it earlier.
Yes. Yeah. And I was really lucky to get I had high school credits coming in, so that was really helpful in terms of getting that track. But yeah, I was in the same position where I thought I wanted to do counseling, and then, yeah, just really fortunate for how that kind of course aligned and where that went. So
good. Okay. So really nice job with that first question. Thank you, Brandon. Let's see. So the second question is, how did you start the process of, I think the process of applying to grad school?
Yeah. So I did 2 cycles. So cycle meaning like application years. So my first year, I started looking into the application process. It must have been end of my junior year going into my senior year of college. And I think when that first started, I was really just trying to get an idea of like what my research interest would be, like really broadly. I knew I was interested in more of like social psychology because I'd done a lot of research. My time at UMF, especially through my junior year, primarily in like sports psychology, which I want to branch out into something maybe more general but more specific at the same time. So going into like social psychology and then looking into like kind of pinning down my interests, not something like super like, have 5 or 3 like pinned down, but I knew I was interested in like men and masculinity. I knew I was interested in sports, and I knew I was interested in health. So that was kind of like the building block. And then from there, looking more generally, I know one point that you suggested really early on that was really helpful was to just look at like Google Scholar or PsycInfo and to just see like who's publishing kind of frequently or consistently in some of like the articles that you found to be really interesting. I had lab experience with you, so, and did a project in research methods and then another one in that. So I was already kind of accustomed to seeing some typical names come up in those articles. And there was one person in particular that I reached out to out of that with an inquiry, but that was really early on, was I guess just kind of figuring out what my interests were very generally, and then going a little more further than that to see like who might be doing that research, because then that might lead you down the kind of rabbit hole of like, where do they teach, what does their lab look like, what does their other work look like, and that can kind of blossom from there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's one thing that's so different from the college application process, is that you're like, oh, I think I like this topic. And you would think, okay, I'm going to go narrow down to sports psychology or social psychology. And it really is making a connection with a major advisor. So I really like that idea of the names or names that keep coming up, because you really apply to that person. So, for me, it was Stephanie Shields. I'd read a lot of her work on gender and emotion, and applied for that rather than I want to do an emotion. So it is very much kind of looking for a messiah to kind of follow, is kind of the way, rather than I want to follow this religion or this subtopic. It really is finding a mentor.
Yes.
Which is a surprising part of the process. I think it's not very intuitive that's how it works.
Yeah, and I think especially early on, that was really difficult for me. I think it took me a while to kind of get over that hump, because it is like, you obviously do want to be looking into the program and seeing what they can provide for you in terms of like professional development, whether you're talking about like job opportunities in the future or just like your first year, what maybe like financial support might look like, what course load looks like. But yeah, with grad school, it's definitely different, because you really don't want to get there unless you have somebody there that you're going to be like dedicating your time to, dedicating your work to, like working alongside somebody whose interests you align with. The program's kind of like a really great added bonus almost. It is very important, but it kind of runs parallel to how important working with a good advisor is.
Right. And well put. And there are certain years that advisors will be accepting students, and it seems like it's not necessarily every year. So it'll be like at 2023, they're accepting someone, but next year they're not going to be accepting students. So typically we'll have anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 students in their lab. And so if they're full up with upperclassmen, so to speak, they're not going to be accepting other students.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why it's always great. I know I touched on inquiry emails a little earlier, but that's another really great tool, is because when you start to go through the search process, the grad school search process, that is, like, you'll find very early on that not all of their information is updated. It varies school to school. So that's when an inquiry email can be really helpful, because you can get an idea of reaching out directly to an advisor and asking them directly whether or not they're accepting applications. There'll be some places that will like give a whole list of all their faculty and who's accepting, but depending on when you start, sometimes they don't have them listed yet, or just depending on the school, they won't have them listed. So that's also a great tool to use too, is to just, feel free to reach out, obviously like professional, but that can give you a really good sense, like firsthand too, of what you could be looking at for your applications.
Right, great. And you compose those. I remember those emails. You compose them very carefully, and nicely, short, this is who this is who I am, this is my background, and I'm curious if you're accepting students in this current year. I wish things were more standardized. It seems like for undergraduate, things are pretty standard. You go to, Smith College or to UMF or to UMO or to debates, you're going to have a pretty standard, these are our faculty, these are the things that they do, but it's really, at a time when people need more direction, it's so kind of opaque. It's not a very clear process.
Yeah, it is very it's much more independently driven, unless you do what I did and just drag a bunch of people into the process to help you. That also helps too.
Yeah, so very, very smart way to do it is to reach out. I do wonder how many people just kind of fall to the to the sides. They just hit these obstacles and they feel like it's the universe telling them not to proceed. And that's worrying. So I think tenacity is another attribute. Kind of sticking with it. So let's see, a couple more questions. Let's see, what would you say to a student who wants to pursue a PhD but isn't certain about the topic area they want to pursue?
I mean, if you really don't know what you want to do, it might be recommended to go the master's route first, just because that can at least give you a more general background of various topics in psychology. It's kind of a much more applied degree, I guess you could say. It's the next step from a bachelor's, definitely. So that would probably be what I would suggest, because then at least then you can kind of you'll have much more focused support, especially with master's programs being more guided towards directing students to the next step with a PhD or going into a career. So they'll be very, very helpful in terms of getting you to focus in on specific interests, if that's something that you are having trouble with early on. But if you have a problem like I did, where it's harder to kind of, you have so many interests, or not exactly sure what they are in its entirety, that you don't know how to kind of whittle it down to a specific, handful, you could say, I guess, of interests that you want to be sticking with, especially through your application process, and that you could see yourself working on for the next 5-6 years. I'd probably say look up articles on those research interests and see which ones you find the most enjoyable to read. Because I know for me, I was really, I was talking about earlier, I was really interested in masculinity and sports were kind of the two that stuck out to me. And I think that was because I had, not only did I have experience, a sports background growing up, and found that to be a really interesting narrative, especially with how it works with masculinity. But also I felt like it was a field that wasn't necessarily discussed a whole lot, at least during my upbringing and that sort of thing. So I think those kind of personal context cues played a lot into what I found to be interesting, especially when I was reading articles and kind of coming up with discussion questions during those readings and thinking of ways that they could apply future research to the same ideas. I think once I started to have those kind of internal and external, in the lab also, but especially those internal conversations when I was going through the application process and trying to figure out what my interests were. I think once I kind of realized what I was having the most, not debate, but the most thought towards, I guess, for interest, the more that I realized that was probably what I was most interested in honing down on.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. There are some things that feel like work when you're an undergraduate, and even things that are fun, can feel like work sometimes. But I remember that article, one of the articles on policing of masculinity, was so, this and I can't remember the author's name, the researcher.
Oh yeah, it was Christopher Regeluth and Michael Addis. Yeah.
Honest. Yes, thank you. So they, they were like, okay, let's, examine, let's see how boys, adolescent, mid-adolescent boys kind of police each other, through, and what, let's like kind of code. Is it verbal? Is it physical? Is it teasing? Is it, so they came up with these really, just kind of qualitative, investigation where they were asking boys, kind of when another boy wants to, or a man wants to kind of referee how you're presenting yourself in terms of masculinity, what do they do? And I remember that was a really exciting, article for me to read too. So when you get that kind of energy with a article that you're like, I know this is work, but this is like really, fresh and exciting. And I know that those were, folks that you communicated with as you were looking at grad school. So that's a wonderful bellwether. If, how do you figure out what topic is going to be the right one for you? And I think there's a myth that people go in and they're laser beam. I know I want to do gender and emotion. And I think honestly, it tends to be something, at least in my cohort of 9 other, undergraduates going on to grad school. We were all with 9 different major professors at UC Davis, and we all were, there was a little bit of horse trading, okay, I started out personality, now I think I want to, go to gender. But for the most part, I don't think anyone was like, I really want to do, sports and men, or, masculinity. I think it's okay to be a little bit, as long as you're not like really ambivalent about it. I think it's okay to be a little bit, I'm kind of thinking this is cool, but this is a good kind of toehold.
And that's why I like to think of it as like an interest as opposed to a focus, because I definitely, the last thing I want to do is like pigeonhole myself, especially this early on, because I'm already like, I think that contributes a lot to like imposter syndrome, especially now being in the situation where going into grad school with a bunch of other people who are qualified, if not more qualified. So that definitely contributes to it. But and that's something too, like I am interested in masculinity. I am interested in sports and health, but I like to think that I can remain flexible on that. And through experiences in grad school, maybe that'll change, and that's, it'll be interesting to see if that stays true or not. But it is something that I don't want to remain rigid. So that is a good point too.
Great attitude to have as you're going in there. And everybody was going to have that imposter syndrome, feeling, at least talking to, and when you get your first tenure track job, same thing. You're like, okay, everyone else seems like they know what they're doing. But, I think it's, just much more ubiquitous than we give it credit for. All right, so a couple more questions. The fourth one, what aspects of the application process most surprised you?
The application process, I think the one that probably surprised me the most was it's called a few different things depending on where you're applying, I guess. It's essentially the application essay. You also see it called like statement of purpose, statement of goals, I think was one of them, personal statement. They all kind of mean something slightly different, but it's essentially the same thing. I wouldn't say it's surprising that I didn't expect it, because I knew that that was going to be a requirement for just about every school I applied to. I think what was the most surprising thing was like, you're told that it's going to take you a really long time. It's going to take you longer than you expect. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like I'll start it early then, because I can get it out of the way, and that'll save me room for applications. But I think it surprised me that it really does take as long as people warn you about, and it is something that is like a constant. I think just like the sheer amount of time that goes into it, I think is the most surprising part of it. And something you don't have to plan for, obviously, because at the end of the day, as much time put into it is like the quality of the product that you're going to put out. So for me, it was like I might as well start really early and put them on a lot of time to hopefully get the best product I can out of this process. And I think I started it in like August, thinking that I was going to have plenty of time, and I literally was writing it and working on it right up to the deadline of my applications, which was in December, in some cases January, based on the school that it was. So I think just like it comes up so fast, the whole process in general. And that's only one part of the application process, but the statement really is as much work, if not more, than people tell you it is. And so I think that was like the most surprising thing, especially like going through it. Like, I can't believe that this is taking this long.
And you're a good writer. You're this is the thing that's I think surprising about it is you're like, okay, I know how to write, I know my vision, but yeah, it's basically you're a little bit of a bio and kind of where you want to go next, and honing that is much harder than it appears. So yeah, that's a good one. Any other aspects that surprised you?
I think maybe another thing that really surprised me was like how reciprocating professors can be. Not only like at UMF if you ask for like their help, but also like if you're reaching out for like inquiry emails like I was. There's a lot of professors, there'll be some that like won't respond to you, and that's normal because they have such a ridiculously crazy work schedule. But I guess I was surprised with like how much response I got back from potential advisors, from faculty, and like how much support they're giving in terms of like asking more about my interests, asking more about my work, talking more about their work, and kind of giving me like a better sense of direction about where their work was going. Like, I guess, for example, Mary Himmelstein, who is at Kent State, who I'm going to be working for, in the fall, when I first emailed her, I talked about being interested in masculinity and kind of cited one of her articles that she wrote, I think in like published in 2017, 2018. It was something like that. And it was really great to hear back from her, because then she was kind of like, well, that was my interests in masculinity. I'm kind of going in that direction, but more shifting into like weight stigma and health behaviors. And so kind of like gave like more of a kind of redirected that focus, but was also like, if this is something you're interested in, I'd be happy to talk more about it, but just wanted to let you know. So I think like that sense of communication, obviously that's not going to happen for everybody, but that was kind of like a shock to me. It was like, it was nice to kind of hear that direction, especially with how busy they are. And the same goes too for like, if you attend open houses, which I definitely recommend, some of the students there will be really nice and also really willing to give like their support. Like for one school that I applied to, a student that I met at the open house offered to read my statement to give feedback on it.
Wow.
Which is really surprising, just given the fact that they're going through the same workload as any other grad student, knowing how that is. So that was really cool for people to be so willing to help. I think just maybe it was a knowing what it's like in my shoes sort of thing, but I guess, yeah, just all the support was a really nice surprise.
Good, excellent. All right. So let's see, our last question is, do you have any pieces of advice, things you wish you'd known for people who are thinking of applying to grad school, or if someone's about to apply to particularly an experimental program, a Ph.D. Program?
Well, so I applied, I mentioned this earlier, but I applied 2 years, so 2 cycles. So that's what the lingo is, I guess, for that. But my first year was definitely did not have as much of an idea of what I was doing as I did my second year, and I learned a lot from that first year. And so I guess like basing it off of that experience, I think the biggest difference between my first and second year was definitely focusing more on the statement. I think if you go into the career services, if you talk to your advisor and they're willing to help you on it, those are really, really great resources. And if you start early, and that's another piece of advice I guess I'd give is, in general, just start the application process early, whether that's identifying your interests, identifying schools, identifying advisors, and getting all that work started. Definitely giving yourself as much time as you can is going to be really, really beneficial, because you can catch things later on that you might have missed earlier, or you just have more time to like work on that. So hopefully getting out a better product, and making yourself more competitive. I definitely think that also, I guess maybe another piece of advice I'd have is just trying to do as thorough as a search as you can get. I'd probably suggest getting what's it called? It's back here somewhere. It's the APA. APA has like a grad school program they do every year. So it gives like they collect a ton of information on different grad programs. I think it's like subscription based right now online. So it's like, I think it was like $20 for 3 months, but that was really helpful for the search process for programs, because as you'll find out if you're searching for grad schools, there's no one website that has all the information you need for the searches, which is really, really, it becomes really tedious. It's like a part-time job. The whole thing is a part-time job essentially, but especially that part is just like a lot of work. So definitely suggest doing APA, because it won't give you all the information, but I'll give you a pretty decent idea of like what programs might be of interest, and then you can kind of use that as a launching pad to look into those programs more specifically, and those kind of perks and whatnot, what comes with that. I'd say also probably like, don't be afraid to talk to faculty, professors. I think Karol, I talked to you about grad school at least my sophomore year, maybe earlier. At least that was my goal. But everybody's been through it that is teaching here. So they're gonna have the best advice that you could possibly have at your disposal, literally behind the door if you just go and ask, or on Zoom. I guess it depends how they do their appointments, but definitely do not be afraid to talk to faculty about their experiences, about suggestions they have. Also, don't be afraid to get more experience, whether that's research or if you want to get counseling experience. Dan is a great resource, obviously. I'm blanking on everybody's names right now, but definitely don't be afraid to make the connections.
Yeah, maybe the faculty who are doing the job that you're like, that's what I want to do. I want to be either a counselor and a professor, or I want to be an experimental psychologist. I think that's an excellent piece of advice. I think also, your GPA is phenomenal. And so I think having, early on, having that strong GPA puts you in the best position. Unlike high school to college, GPA is only part of the story. They really are looking for not just a super duper undergraduate with a beautiful GPA, but also research experience. So I think that would be my piece of advice is, taking research methods if you can early on, looking for research opportunities with faculty members, joining a lab, so you can get, some of the things that made Brandon's resume really stand out, compared to the other people, because there were going to be oftentimes 300 people, applying for a couple of slots in one lab, is, having that. And for social psych, I think it's about a 9 or 10% acceptance rate. And again, those are people who've, been doing really diligently, really want to, have gone through all the pain of putting this application together. So not to be discouraging, but it's right up there with clinical PhD programs in terms of its selectivity. And so I think having that research experience, if you can, publications, that's kind of the cherry on top, or research presentations at not only undergraduate conferences, but also you had a couple of presentations at national and regional psychology conferences. So I think all of those things would be my pieces of advice to anyone listening. Those are the things that are, all together, as well as the good statement of purpose, strong statement of purpose, and having a rigorous, transcript. So, well, I think that is everything, Brandon, that we had on our list today. Thank you for taking this time to talk to us. And we are all wishing you the very best. Godspeed as you embark on this new journey. And so thank you so much for spending the time today to do this.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And I'm assuming I'll have contact information somewhere at some point. But don't feel pressured to reach out and ask me questions if you want to too. I'll always be a resource no matter where I am. So feel free to ask anything if you have any other questions.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and hope you have a good rest of the day, Brandon.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.